Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining the QAP engagement session. We will get started momentarily. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining the QAP update to discuss the 9% criteria and process. We will get started momentarily. Okay. All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Kim Travis. I'm the engagement coordinator for the Affordable Rental Housing Division and helping to facilitate our meeting today. Go ahead and share our agenda and our meeting objective for today, really to collect input to inform the QAP update, including feedback about proposed 9% LIHTC criteria and proposed application process through the ORCA. So we'll start out with an overview of the LIHTC program for those that may be newer to the program. For those that are familiar, this may seem like a repeat from recent presentations, but we want to make sure we're level setting. So we'll start with an overview of the LIHTC program and then talk about proposed QAP updates and proposed 9% criteria and the application process through the ORCA. Then we will move into small group discussions to get your input on some questions that we have for you, but also to hear your reactions to these proposals that we're going to present. And then we'll come back together around 4:50 or so and talk about next steps for the QAP. All right. So these may look familiar to you all, but wanting to share again around our process agreements and that we practice in our spaces to help foster an inclusive environment. So we ask that you share these process agreements with us today in this main session, and then into carrying that into the smaller breakout room discussions later this afternoon as well. And then I think we'll jump right into low-income housing tax credit, Natasha.
Great, thanks, Kim, and hello, everybody. I'm Natasha Detweiler-Davy, she/her, Director of Affordable Rental Housing. Really happy to be here today to continue our conversation on tax credits and implementing into the ORCA. I think we have kind of shared a version of this slide before, I think just to orient us in terms of the resources that we're talking about in the which have not yet been offered through our new application process. And I think probably, I presume the majority of you are familiar, very familiar with these funds and these resources, but this is a federal program, low-income housing tax credit. There are two different types of programs, the 9% low-income housing tax credit and the 4% LIHTC. Each of these have different rules and processes associated with them. Today in this conversation, we're going to focus on the 9% resources, and both of those require that there is a qualified allocation plan that the state adopts, and that meets all of the requirements about how we are both selecting projects, identifying it, and the rules for how those funds work through. And I think I can do the next slide. And both of these resources, again, with tremendous work and energy in the development community, a lot of state and local investment in affordable rental housing, both of these resources are have been oversubscribed. I think on the 9% side of this, which we're focusing on today, we've traditionally done standalone NOFAs that have very complex and rigorous scoring mechanisms to be able to identify and select projects. And so as we are thinking about the ORCA, the opportunity that we have and what we're intending to do is ensure that we can be aligning with some of all of the core principles of the ORCA to be able to also offer tax credits. And I think fundamentally, and for those of you who are maybe in the kickoff or in Housing Oregon or in Housing Stability Council conversations on these funds, we know that, as we navigated in creating and implementing the ORCA, one of the principles that we have tried to be consistent around is ensuring that there is ability to focus the majority of our effort and energy on investing into projects that are moving forward. And so the idea that we want to be able to implement the tax credits in a way that we can add into a cadence of the ORCA, which has deconstructed kind of the robust competition and really translated into identifying as early as possible that you have resources that you could be accessing, and then use the standards that we've established for all projects throughout that. And so I think that is how we're approaching and orienting toward doing this update, which is both an update to our Qualified Allocation Plan, but also our ORCA and that application and process. And I think I'll go to the next slide, which is hand it back to Amy, or over to Amy.
Thanks, Natasha. I'm Amy Cole, and I'm the Assistant Director of Development Resources at OHCS. So as we talk about what we're proposing for QAP updates, we are building on a lot of the input that you have already provided, that partners have provided us through ORCA engagement and through previous QAP engagement, and we're highlighting a few ways that we're incorporating your input. So we're using the ORCA geographic set-asides for both 4% and 9% LIHTC. We are keeping other 9% set-asides the same, so that means we're still keeping 25% set aside for preservation, 10% for nonprofits, and 10% for tribal Native Nation projects. And as I said, we'll use the ORCA region, geographic regions, Western, Eastern, and Metro for both 4s and 9s. The 9% competition will happen through selection between intake and impact assessment steps. This is kind of like what we've been referring to as a half step or step 0.5. And we'll talk a little bit more about the criteria that we're proposing in a few minutes. So the approach to the 9% competition also addresses something that we've heard from partners, that it's expensive to apply for something that you don't know if you'll get. And we're trying to get ahead of that by doing the 9% competition earlier in the process, before we need partners to pay an application charge. So let's see, I didn't talk about subsidy limits, but we will talk about that later in the presentation. And we'll also be working on updating 4%, the 4% Housing Authority allocation process. So those are our proposals, and I think now I'm handing it to Jackie to talk about set-asides.
Thank you, Amy. Hi, everyone. My name is Jackie Santiago, and I'm the Senior Tax Credit Program Manager here at OHCS. I use she, her pronouns. So OHCS receives and allocates approximately 12 million in annual 9% tax credits. The previous set-asides for these resources were 25% preservation, 10% Native Nation, previously known as tribal, and 65% for geographic regions. Those regions were then broken down approximately to 47% metro, 16% non-metro participating jurisdiction, 15% balance of state urban, and 22% balance of state rural. The new proposed set-asides would have both preservation and Native Nation unchanged. However, the geographic set-asides would change to 45% Western region, 40% metro region, and 15% Eastern region, mirroring the ORCA. We also are required to allocate 10% of these resources to nonprofits required by code, and that is remaining unchanged. Next slide, please. All right. So the 9% resources were previously allocated through the NOFA process. The NOFA included robust scoring and evaluation within regions and set-asides. And the scoring elements included both narrative and data-based factors. So for those who have been through the NOFA process, it was very rigorous and included a lot of elements that are now changing. So now we are going to instead align with the ORCA. Projects will no longer be scored. Instead, all projects must meet upfront standards, and should there be more eligible projects than resources available, tiebreakers will be implemented to select top projects to move into impact assessment. Next slide, please. So here we're going to talk about the proposed LIHTC process. Projects will first submit their initial intake form, and following that, they will submit a 9% LIHTC request form identifying their interest in receiving 9%. Projects will then be selected prior to the submission of their full application, and they'll be selected based on evaluation using mandatory criteria and supplemental criteria reflecting OHCS priorities. So as stated in the previous slide, if there are more projects than resources available, tiebreakers will be used, and those selected projects will then move into impact assessment so that they can complete the ORCA process. Next slide, please. So in order to prioritize projects that meet policy goals, we are proposing these criteria to select projects. For the mandatory criteria, projects must meet all of them. This includes responsive to tenant and community needs, economic workforce impact. Now, for the supplemental criteria, projects must meet 3. And those criteria, they break out into multiple parts, but it is responsive to tenant and community needs, Section 42 considerations, and organization type. So as a note, these specific details are listed on the 5-page 9% ORCA and QAP update document, which we can add a link to that in the chat. It's also likely that most projects will meet the mandatory and supplemental criteria. So we have proposed tiebreakers we can use if the demand exceeds the amount of resources. Those tiebreakers include efficient unit production, community need, average AMI, and the distribution of resource. And I believe I'm handing it to Natasha, is that correct?
Yeah. Let's see, next slide, I think.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we, I think we have kicked off some of these conversations in a webinar. We have been at Housing Oregon to talk. We have had lots of conversations with a lot of you wanting to kind of figure out how we use this conversation to bring us further down the road of getting your thoughts and input. I think, these are some of the kind of top things that, as we have been, reflecting on the conversations that we've had, like the themes that we are seeing. So first is a question around how culturally specific organizations are prioritized. I think, and Amy will share a little bit more about that in just a minute. We've heard concern about the use of economic and workforce as a criteria in evaluating. We'll also talk a little bit more about that. And then as we kind of look at the tiebreakers, acknowledging that as we have those criteria in place, and where there are more projects that can meet those criteria than we have resources available, we would be using tiebreakers to select those. And I think, we'll assume that in most cases we will have more requests for resources that can pass those criteria. And so we'll be using tiebreakers more so in this version of the program selection process than we had previously. Previously, we had tiebreakers, but we also tied that up also with very rigorous scoring metrics. And so as it stands right now, our efficient unit production is drafted as the first tiebreaker for that. And so I've had a lot of questions around that. I think in particular noting that there are lots of complicated aspects around how you structure it, how you're aligned to putting, identifying what tax credits you need, how many tax credits you need, and that in alignment with the governor's executive order, that was really the intention for that focus, wanting to ensure that we are using all opportunities to get the most units funded and into community. And so I think we'll have a little bit more in just a moment on that, but also as we kind of go into discussion this afternoon, hoping to really get some deep information from folks, both about what the potential consequences, but also what are the other opportunities that we can think about for updating and refining these recommendations. Similarly, I think what are the impacts for in that calculation specifically, but also generally around where Davis-Bacon or prevailing wage are triggered. How do we put this into place while also retaining flexibility? And then how do we want to make sure that we can be continuing to follow up and track to make sure that we're able to speak to where the alignment into the ORCA, how effective is that, and are we ensuring that we're continuing to watch that and share with everyone how that has had impacts. And so I think, Amy, if I know we have a few kind of context slides on the first 3 bullets, so maybe we can just kind of talk a little bit about each of those to share what we want to say on those at this point.
Okay, thanks, Natasha. All right, so there was a question about how will culturally specific organizations be prioritized in the ORCA, specifically for 9% LIHTC. And here are the ways that we see this happening. And also, this is to say that we are open to feedback and ideas about how to do this. These are just what we have proposed now and how we see it working. So we have a 25% set aside in ORCA for gap resources, which can be leveraged for 9% LIHTC. And something that's different this time around is that we have many resources available in the ORCA that were not necessarily made available in 9% NOFAs in the past, but which can be paired with 9. So it's going to be, that's just a different opportunity when we use the ORCA with all of the many various types of gap resources that are available. Organizations that are culturally specific qualify for one of the supplemental criteria just by virtue of being a culturally specific organization. So in that way, they need to meet fewer other criteria that generally add more required features to the project, to projects. And then all projects are required to meet ORCA ERJ strategy evaluation standards. And this has an easier pathway for culturally specific organizations. So next slide. Okay, so economic and workforce criteria. I think Natasha already set the stage very well for this. We just want to say that the way that we envision this working is that we would have a list of options for applicants to select from, and with the ability to ask us ahead of time if something that's not on the list would count toward this criteria. So yeah, I don't know if any other colleagues have anything else they want to talk about for this criteria while we're here.
Yeah, I think I think generally and I think it was at our Housing Oregon conversation where this was kind of coming up, and I think not with the context of what we're looking at. And I think the intent here is to have, some broader substance in our required criteria, but also just an acknowledgement of all of the interconnections of projects to economic and workforce and community and health around there. And so I don't anticipate that this is something that all projects aren't doing, but felt like a space to be able to leverage that, but also still, again, on all of these, I think really keenly interested to understand what concerns would be about this type of question. I think we also identified as we, and I think Jackie was talking about it earlier as well, as we're thinking about these criteria, these are I think our intent is to get to a place where the criteria are not a rigorous essay process, but that we have some clear places where you will be able to attest that it will do it or it will not do it, and have that be relatively consistent, understanding that as we move through the impact assessment following project selection, that assessment has a lot more deeper information provided and evaluated. And so where we see projects being selected based on the criteria established in the 9% up front, we would expect those to continue to carry through. And so, again, I think in not trying to do a big pivot to do something very different, but really wanting to find more ways to talk about the impacts of projects, understanding we're connecting on people, but also in community and local economies. But yeah, I think that's my context for that, and hoping that both the detail of what's provided in there is a little bit helpful, but also understanding that it is, still what will that look like. And I see Mitch popped on screen, so maybe he has additional context, and I see that there's some questions in the chat here coming in as well.
Yeah, I was just going to add, which we've been saying, but this is a proposal. We want to get your feedback on sort of what this might look like in your projects. I know we have a wide variety of projects that serve a wide variety of populations, and these are just some examples that we threw in here, but we want to make sure that this covers the breadth of potential opportunities while still, as Natasha said, being simple to evaluate and evaluate against other projects that are coming through. So yeah, welcome your feedback on this, and any way that we can broaden or make fit sort of the projects that you see coming through, while understanding really the intent here around kind of economic impact to the community that the project will be based in, and thinking about kind of outcomes for the residents of that building. I think is really the intent behind this criteria. Yeah.
There are a few questions related to this in the chat. Can you clarify if this criteria is required or supplemental? Oh, we answered that. Sorry about that.
Yeah, so I think this criteria as drafted and proposed is a required criteria. Again, super happy for your feedback, thoughts, questions around it. I think I also see a question in here if it's required for preservation projects. I think that's, again, is if the idea, if that feedback is this would be really challenging for preservation projects, I think we can take that back. I think that there's as it is right now, it's as a standard, but again, the projects in preservation, I think I also see in here somewhere in here a question around the preservation framework and those priorities, and I think the intent is that this would also the 9% resources would also be leveraging the framework priorities for that. So there's obviously some pieces that matter there in terms of the sequence of that review.
Okay. And then we have one more kind of deep dive slide, and then we'll pause for some answer some additional questions in the chat. I think Amy, go ahead. This is the efficient
Sure.
unit production tiebreaker.
Yep, thank you.
Yeah.
So for the efficient unit production tiebreaker, applicants will be ranked based on the total number of credits requested per unit that they'll be providing for their communities. And, you know, for this one, we wanted to highlight that we would be ranking applications, or to clarify, we'd be ranking applications based only on the total number of credits per unit and not on the total amount of OHCS resources. So,
Thanks for that. Yeah, and then I think there is a question earlier here in the chat about if there's no scoring, what would break a tie in the case of more projects than resources?
So this is a data-based metric where it would be calculated and then rank ordered of projects. And so then when there would be a tie as those top projects are selected, connected to where resources are available, we would use the second tiebreaker if that was, and so on down the line of those tiebreakers.
Okay, thanks for that, Natasha. Let's see, we do have a question, and I'm not sure, my chat is not functioning great here, but did we answer Shelley's question about the scattered site projects? Do we want to take that question now?
Yeah, right now, and I know which I saw that pop in as well. So right now with the gap only resources, we have not allowed scattered sites, understanding that there's not the same economies of scale that you get when you are leveraging tax credits and are able to get an equity investor based on the size and scale of project. I think I would anticipate that we have ability to support tax credit applications with tax credits. No, scattered site applications with tax credits. I think those were the right words. I think, you know, a kind of follow up in the, again, preservation framework arena, but I think understanding the places and functions where there are existing publicly supported affordable rental housing at risk of loss, which if portfolioed would be large enough to be able to put forward as a tax credit investment. And I think we need to be responsive to those opportunities.
Okay, we have some additional questions and some comments around the economic workforce criteria. We really appreciate those comments, and we'll have more time to discuss those in smaller groups if you want to bring those questions and comments in there as well. Question here about how is OHCS defining total number of credits requested in a basis boost scenario?
I think unlike this is trying to think of the right response. So I think that we would be using, there's not all 9% projects maximize basis. And we would be calculating it based on the total credits that you are using.
Okay. Thank you. Will the ORCA prioritization criteria have any effect on the tax credit apps?
To say all ORCA standards are going to apply. Once you get through this initial 9% kind of screening, you would just move into that impact assessment, and you would need to follow all of the standards that are in the ORCA process: impact assessment, financial eligibility, and commitment, as we have done for our gap fund only funding.
Yeah, so it would include the same things. If you're able to meet the conditions of your commitments and the letter of intent coming through after you've met the standards from the evaluation standards in the impact assessment, you would need to be able to meet those conditions to retain the resources. And if a project, for instance, was selected through this process to be able to move forward through the ORCA using 9% tax credits, and that project was unable to demonstrate that it could meet all of the ORCA evaluation standards, that project would have to step out and be able to re-enter later, but we would go to the next project on the list. I think similarly to our current QAP, which has that similar process, I just think the cadence of that looks a little bit different in an ORCA deployment. But we would retain that wait list for the year. I think right now in the QAP, we hold that until, if it's released after October or something, we offer it the following year. And I think, another piece around tax credit resources, just for like awareness, is these are time sensitive. Private activity bonds for 4%, but also 9% tax credit allocations are time sensitive. We don't have infinite ability to extend timelines into the future. There are carryover deadlines associated with 9% and other regulations that mean that if we are a project with a year's reservation of tax credits is unable to move forward, there's a risk that the state loses that investment. And so we retain a bunch of rigor. We have policies in place where we are forward committing our 9%. So we have some better ways to solve those challenges. But it is a different impact than, funding that we are directly allocated to invest, which might have a little bit more flexibility about carrying those forward over into the next calendar year or other. If we are failing to meet IRS places of use around the resource, we do in fact lose it. And if we are unable to use all of our resources, we as a state lose the opportunity to access national pool, where we can get a portion of the credits that are returned from other states. So I think across all of this, we really want to ensure that we are driving towards readiness, making sure that we are investing in projects moving forward. And I think acutely in tax credits, these are that has real sensitivity and impact to the way that we need to orient ourselves.
Okay, thanks for that, Natasha. A question here about would we know the tie? I think again about tiebreakers. We know the tie in advance of application, or would we be relying on OHCS to calculate the ties without knowledge of where a project ranks in the tie process? The preferred format would be for the tie scoring to be 100% understandable and replicable from the start.
Yes, I agree. I think it is. No, so you will fill out your form. It's an application form. You will submit that. We will evaluate whether projects meet criteria, and then we will go into tiebreakers. And we will certainly share those. Our intent is to have data-based metrics that are having that calculation simple and achievable, meaningful, but simple and achievable versus arguable and requiring a lot of the work that was required for our NOFA processes to dig in to get clarification and all of that. And anyway, significant time impacts.
All right, and then a question about the tiebreaker in order of how they will be scored, i.e. unit efficiency over community need. I think I'm going to go back because we have that on this slide, right? So that's in order 1, 2, 3, 4. So efficient unit production is the first one of the tiebreakers. Okay. Let's see. A lot of questions coming in. Thanks, you all. I'm sorry. Oh, Mariana asks, is that a yes or a no? I think to your description.
I don't know what part of
What-
the question Mariana
Mariana,
is
do you
asking
want
about. I think what I indicated is that no, you're not going to know before we use tiebreakers. If we are using tiebreakers, yes, we will share the information back around how those were calculated.
Does that answer your question, Mariana? Want to come off mute?
Yes.
Okay. Great. Okay, a number of thoughts here about let's see, basis boost. Boost eligible projects are prioritized, or should they be, or at least not disadvantaged? Do we need more description on that one in order to answer it? How could this be equalized so basis eligible projects are prioritized? Or at least not disadvantaged? Do we need more clarification there?
I don't know. Mitch, do you have ideas?
I think that's a great comment to put in the Easy Retro board. We can talk about it. I think there's a lot of good comments in here about how these different priorities kind of balance with each other, how some of them might kind of be at odds with one another. And those are exactly the types of input that we're looking for, specifically from your lenses as kind of project owners and developers, kind of where things might not vibe with the idea that we do need to kind of have some level of scoring-ish. It's not scoring, it's some level of screening, I guess, to be able to do that competitive component of the 9% credits. And this is sort of our attempt at creating something that is simple, that folks can kind of self-screen out if they're not going to meet these initial standards, and then potentially have to use tiebreakers if enough people go through. That's the process that we want to go through. These criteria were developed kind of with a lot of the input that we've received over the last several years around sort of things that are priorities for both internally, the state, the governor's office, the legislature, and I think also a lot of community input on sort of what is important in those communities. So trying to balance a lot of things. And if that balance is off, please tell us. That's why we're here today, is to get your feedback on that. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think the overall, the objective is to think about what is a way, as we are identifying what projects to, in that selection, to have the projects that are giving us the most units for the resources. And I think from again, the executive order on production is wanting to have us create a tremendous amount of affordable housing opportunities. We fund a lot of projects with gap only, given the state investments, and the tax credit leverage is the opportunity to get a broader ability to get bigger projects. And I think that's the logic there. And I think we would be very keenly interested in other ways to look at that, or what are the strategies. And I think flagging the unintended consequences of it, I think, in our summary of the things that we have heard to date, I think, the consideration for what happens when there's BOLI or prevailing wage is part of that. And can we figure out a corresponding policy adjustment that mediates that? And I think those are achievable with input and feedback from you all in terms of thinking about what could that look like that helps offset that unintended consequence. Again, in systems that are responsive where things come up.
We have a question. Shelley's got her hand raised, and I just wanted to let folks know we will be moving into smaller groups and using Easy Retro board. Here are some of the questions we want to discuss with you, along with the other information you're sharing with us in the chat. So hold tight on those, but we'll go ahead, Shelley, with your question.
I'm just wondering, when it comes to the tax credit projects that have basis boosts, that maybe to make it a level playing field, is they're evaluated prior to the boost. And so they're evaluated the same as everybody else. And the boost is a good bonus. I mean, that's, helps you so that you look at the tax credits they're asking for before the boost and stuff.
Absolutely. Thank you, Shelley. I think that's a good idea.
All
And I
right.
see other comments in the chat just around can we look at bedroom size instead of units? Absolutely appreciate the feedback. I think in a lot of places we have focused on bedrooms, and I think there's good reason for that. I think our measurement of performance against the executive orders around units, but I think we know that bedroom size matters. So I think those are all important.
All right. Great. Well, so I think this is a great segue into smaller group. Folks are warmed up and ready to talk about this a little bit more. So I will put in the chat a link to an easy retro board where you can add your responses to these questions. We've got 4 basic questions here, and then also a category for other questions that you have, or kind of parking lot ideas as well. You can feel free to use that column as well. So I'm going to stop sharing and grab the Easy Retro board link, and then we will break into small groups, smaller group discussions for about 30 minutes. And then we'll come back together and talk about next steps and wrap up. So do you all see the link to the Easy Retro board in the chat? Okay, great. And then we've got 3 rooms, so we will have lots of opportunity to share. So I'm going to go ahead and open all of those rooms up, and we will see you back here in the main room. If you have any trouble, we'll be there to help you and get you into a room. So I'm going to launch these. Okay. Now, I see. Somehow we did not get folks assigned to these, so apologies about that. And let me see. I'm gonna close the rooms and do that again. So thanks for that. Call folks back. I apologize. Thanks for bearing with me. And get these started. Okay. Feel free to start populating the Easy Retro board while we're dealing with this technical issue. And I'll put that link in the chat again. Okay. Okay. Apologies about that. I'm going to automatically allow you to choose a room. And I'm going to open the rooms. And do you all see the rooms? 1, 2, and 3.
I do not.
No? Okay.
No, I do not.
Now I do.
Nope.
There's a thing at the tab at the bottom that says breakout rooms. Okay.
Sorry about that. Thanks for sticking with us. So please manually join a group. 1, 2, and 3.
Can you again tell us where that's at? I don't have a tab at the bottom of my
Oh, you
screen.
don't, at the bottom, if you click,
To go to more at the bottom
More.
and then,
I'm
Yeah.
just gonna pull him into breakout rooms. And hey, Mark. Are we still recording? Him? Oh, hey.
Whoa,
Hey, I just saw your name and so I kept you here. How are you?
I'm all right. I wasn't planning on this from down from 100, so I guess I can.
Yeah. Do you yeah, I can send you to a room. I just thought I'd say hi. I've
Right.
haven't seen you in a while.
Indeed, it's been a while. Yeah. So definitely got some interesting stuff here going on. That's for
Yeah.
sure.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can move you over to a breakout room.
That'd be fine.
Great.
All right. Here we are. Thanks all for taking time to break into smaller groups, and the Easy Retro board is looking very colorful. Lots of input that we will be analyzing that you provided. So we really appreciate all of that. And we're here now just to kind of wrap up and share next steps. And I'll share my screen again. Let's see. Where are we? Okay. All right. So, so tomorrow we have a another session on focused on the 4% LIHTC program. So we will be covering some of the same introductory kind of framing conversations in that session. But if you have interest in the 4% program, please consider joining us there. It's tomorrow, 9:30 to 11. I will put the link to the QAP page in the chat, so you can click on the Zoom link there and register for that. Then we will be, and actually I'm going to turn over to Natasha. I've been talking a lot, so if there's you want to share the rest of the kind of process here and anticipated timeline for the finalizing the QAP, that would be great.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think I'll just echo gratitude for all of the conversations. It's been consuming all of the comments. Excited to dig in with the team and take feedback, comments, and insight from you. Our intent is to, over the next couple of months of Housing Stability Council conversations, kind of finalize the overall framework for that update to be able to then draft the red lines into the QAP to do, engagement, public comment processes around to be able to finalize that, to be able to implement in the new year, and be able to update with all of the resources. So I think we can maybe close out around that, and just again, appreciation and gratitude. Continue to be interested in hearing all of your thoughts and perspective as we go through each step of that process. I think there's surely going to be some additional conversations that stem from the conversations today. And so we'll make sure that we are following up on all of those.
Yes, and just a note, we will keep the Easy Retro boards open for the next few days so that you can access those and read through. There is a lot of great input there, and I know it's beneficial for everyone to just have eyes on the input that we're receiving. So we'll keep those open, and then we'll post the PDFs on the website along with the recordings for this session, and then tomorrow's session and the corresponding slide decks as well. And then just note here that you can always email your QAP comments to the QAP email address, hcs.qap@hcs.oregon.gov. So really, and I see the comment here about not being able to like comments in the other column of the retro board. I'll see if I can change those settings. Apologies if I can't, but go ahead and you can also put the same comment in the other column of the retro board, and we know that you're kind of plus upping that one if we see that comment more than once in that other column. We'll know that other folks like that as well. So thank you all for continuing to provide us this great input, and we look forward to hearing from you and seeing some of you tomorrow. So thank you all, and have a good evening.